The smartphone inside this box cost $43,000 to make. And trust me, you haven't seen a phone camera like it. But for it to make sense, we need to understand the problem with most smartphone cameras. Okay, so the single main component of any camera is the sensor. The sensor is the thing that takes in light and turns that light into a digital output that then becomes the image. The bigger the sensor, the more light you can process, and therefore the higher quality that end image is going to be. Fine, there's a good chance you knew that already, but this is why every few years we are seeing camera sensors on phones get bigger and bigger. Early smartphones like the iPhone 3GS had quarter-inch sensors. We started pushing half-inch sensors on phones like the 12 Pro, which is actually even more of a jump than it sounds at about 4 times the total sensor area. And then just recently, a couple of phones have even leapt all the way to 1-inch sensors, which is basically 4 times that. And on one hand, this is great, because these 1-inch sensors are now basically the same size as the sensors found in entry-level point-and-shoot cameras, to the point where now it just does not make sense to ever buy one of those. Smartphones are way more connected, you can share your photos in seconds, they have way faster, more intuitive interfaces, better quality, larger screens, more powerful, more advanced microphones with better noise reduction. And that's not even factoring in the supremely intelligent artificial intelligence which enhances the sharpness, the color, and brightens people's faces on an individual pixel level. So yeah, now that smartphones also have the sensor size to match, it's not really a surprise that point-and-shoots have effectively fallen off the face of the planet. But there is a bit of a problem for these guys. If smartphones are to continue on this journey, to, let's say, properly take on the next tier, which would be high-end mirrorless or DSLR cameras, then their sensors would need to get many times bigger still. But they can't. You might have noticed over the last few years that it's not just that the cameras on phones are getting wider, but they're also sticking out more. And that's because the larger the sensor, the larger the lens also needs to be able to properly direct light to that whole sensor area to actually take advantage of it. And the further the distance required between that lens and the sensor sitting behind. Which means that while there'd actually be very little problem fitting a sensor twice the size of what we have now into a phone, it's just what you then have to do to the lens, that's what becomes the sticking point. I feel like I need to stress this. Very few people are going to buy a phone that they can't fit into their pocket just because the lens is too big. And that is where this new phone comes in. This is a Xiaomi 12S Ultra concept. And it's basically what happens when you say, okay, let's just forget that limitation for a second. Let's not worry about portability and let's just see what's technically possible on a smartphone. Should not be holding it like that. There's only 3 of these made in the whole world. That's why it's worth $43,000. They did not hold back with this unboxing experience. So this is the phone, this is the lens mount, and the lens. This is one dense piece of kit. So the company started with what I would say is probably already the best phone camera for photography, the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. And that phone already has a 1-inch sensor over here, but we're not going to be using that here. Xiaomi has instead removed what was previously an ultra-wide camera in the middle and replaced that with a second, special 1-inch sensor. And this is what's going to be the main camera of this new phone. And one of the special things about it is that they've made this an exposed sensor, meaning that while every single other phone camera already has a tiny little lens attached onto it, which basically fixes how the light is focused onto that sensor, Xiaomi have basically said, well, screw that. We don't want any of your flat lenses. This second main sensor is only covered by an extremely thin sheet of sapphire glass, which is just there for protection, because sapphire is basically scratch-proof. And it's also raised above the other sensors, partly to improve heat dissipation, but mostly because you can't actually fit 2 1-inch sensors right next to each other there. But the point is that all of this makes this phone built from the ground up to support external thick lenses, like this one. This is a Leica M lens. It's made for full-frame professional cameras. And I guess because Xiaomi has just recently announced a partnership with Leica, they decided to build the phone to work with Leica lenses. So we get the adapter in first. They're calling this mounting mechanism the Mi mount, which, I mean, hey, at least the words aren't the other way around. So you place the lens in, give it a twist, and that is a successful mount. I've seen a lot of tech in my time. This is actually crazy. And what it means is pretty cool. Compared to the ordinary size lens that we had on the 12S Ultra, which sat at an aperture of f1.9, this one opens up that aperture all the way to as wide as you can possibly get on a phone, f1.4. The wider the aperture, the more light. And so f1.4 basically means that this system is getting in 2 times the amount of light of the pretty beastly already normal 12S Ultra. But then also, magnification. The main cameras on most phones are around 20 to 25 millimeters in focal length. This is a 35 millimeter lens with an additional magnifying adapter, which all basically means this is between 3 and 4 times magnified by default, losslessly using its main camera. So really, your main camera on the 12S Ultra concept is your telephoto camera. And then if you happen to want to take 1-time shots, you take the lens off and use the normal 1-inch sensor over here. Do you know what's kind of cool about this? Last year, where we all saw the standard 12S Ultra, and we thought, oh, cool camera ring, and then just kind of carried on. No one realized that this phone was also being co-developed at the same time and designed to use that camera ring to mount actual lenses onto it. Xiaomi did a sneaky. I do have one quite fundamental problem with this whole system, but we'll get to it. I do just want to see what it can do first. Because like, Xiaomi's gone to all the effort of building a custom smartphone. You have to attach a lens that's half the size of my face. It is begging the obvious question of, how does this compare to just the iPhone in my pocket? Let's see if Xiaomi can wow me. I hope no one heard that. So, for starters, more settings for sure. We've got focus peaking, which means that as I manually adjust the focus ring on this lens, the screen of the phone is going to highlight in red the bits that are in complete focus. You also get zebra lines, which are there to show you when something is overexposed. There's a full-on histogram as well, which shows the total brightness across the entire range of the image. Man, being able to fiddle with settings like this in a friendly smartphone interface, but with the hardware of a proper camera, it's like a 10-year-old dream of mine come true. Leica. Huh. So what about the quality of the photos themselves? Bear in mind, this is not a completely fair test. To keep the images like for like, I am going to have to use the 3x zoom camera on the iPhone, which is not as good as its main camera. But, obviously, the difference is absolutely enormous. I started off with just some plain old shots of scenery, and you can see straight away the extra light gathering ability of this concept phone. It's not necessarily that the shots look brighter, but the extra light does mean more information as you kind of crop in to see the finer details. Interesting caveat though, because focusing at further distances requires basically a level of precision engineering that Xiaomi haven't managed to achieve here, this can only really focus on closer objects within about 20 meters. One thing that I thought would be really fun is to have a portrait mode comparison, because having a wide aperture large lens like this basically means that this is the first time ever that a smartphone can naturally achieve this DSLR-like separation between foreground and background, which is the exact effect that software-based portrait mode has been trying to simulate for the last 10 years. I mean, credit where due, the iPhone's fake portrait mode has reached a stage where, on its own, I don't think the average person would be able to tell that it's not taken on a DSLR. But side by side with the real thing, you do start to notice that it's not quite there. To be honest though, the single biggest area where you'll notice the benefits of a system like this is video. Because video is the one thing that most smartphones and their software-based solutions have struggled to recreate. I also got to mess around with it in low light. And this is the fun bit, because this is what's so interesting about this product. Because it answers the question that I've been thinking for the last 10 years. What would it look like to blend pretty high-end camera hardware with pretty high-end smartphone software, like night mode? Safe to say the results are about what you would expect them to see, but very cool seeing it in action. Okay, time to talk about the problem with this 12S Ultra concept though. But on a serious note for a second, if you do watch my videos regularly and you enjoy them, then I've been through a lot to get this video done. I've literally just come back from the emergency room in the hospital after a life-threatening allergic reaction. I've eaten nothing all day, and this is the most difficult room in the world to film in. Every single time that door opens, we have to stop filming. So yeah, a sub to the channel would be heartwarming. Anyways, even just putting aside the fact that this is already quite bulky, and that, to be fair, at the point where you're already carrying an external lens around with you, you are 70% of the way to just taking a proper main camera body with you too. This is also just a bit of an inefficient system. Leica M lenses are made for proper cameras with much bigger sensors than even the 1-inch one this has. So using it like this, you're still having to put up with the extra space and the weight of the lens, but you're not really getting the full perks from it. As a proof of concept though, this does definitely prove that the concept does work. To check out my video on, funnily enough, why everyone's buying iPhones right now, that's here, and I will catch you there.